James, how is the weather in Montana at the moment?
It's actually pretty nice. They were calling for snow this weekend, but it just turned into rain, so it's not too bad.
Brilliant. Good, good.
Yep.
Well, hello to those of you that are just joining us. We're going to give it another minute or two for everybody to filter in, and then we will get going. Dr. James, you ready?
Yes, sir, Jake.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jake McKenzie. I'm the president and CEO of Intermark, the nation's largest psychology-driven marketing firm. And with me, as always, is Dr. James McFarland. Dr. James is a PhD behavioral psychologist, and we love to refer to him as our people scientist, somebody that helps us understand consumers better at a psychological level, but also how we can affect those consumers with appropriate marketing. So welcome, Dr. James.
Thanks, Jake. It's good to be here.
So before we get going, the marketing folks came up with a great new promotion for this. We have a lunch and learn promotion for one of our attendees, and they've just let me know that the winner is Jennifer McKay. Jennifer, you're going to be getting an email from our team with information on how to collect that. Congratulations. For the rest of you, we will dive in to talk about AI. Now, a warning. As we talk about AI, I'm not here to do a review of all the AI platforms and the best way to get information out of them, but rather how it's affecting human psychology and how we need to adapt from that with our marketing message. So as we go through this, if you have questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A. I'll be reviewing those at the very end and trying to answer as many questions as we have as with the time provided. With that in mind, I'll tell you a little bit about Intermark. To start, of course, we are the nation's largest psychology-driven marketing firm. We are headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama. We have offices in Atlanta and in South Florida. And we cover everything under the marketing sun. Our exceptional team works in every facet of marketing. And we are blessed to work with some of the best clients in the world. These are all folks that cover a spread of different industries, both business to consumer and business to business. But what they all have in common is a dedication to understanding their customers better so they can deliver marketing solutions that connect with those customers even better. As a result, they're all getting dramatic outcomes that overachieve what you might see in the broader marketplace. All right, enough about us. Let's dive into the topic at hand and talk about AI. Now, I don't have to tell you that this is a hot topic. In fact, James, I would dare say that this is the far and away the most frequent question we've gotten over the last couple of months as we've been talking about what to cover next. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everyone's talking about AI. It's the next big thing. Where's it going? What's going to happen with it? And we don't know is kind of the fun answer, which is probably why it's generating so much buzz.
That's right. It is happening rapidly, and it's happening in all sectors of the economy, from how it's affecting healthcare. And we're seeing some crazy statistics like it's overperforming human doctors in spotting cancer by 10 percentage points, which is crazy. And we're seeing it in other areas where there have been some catastrophic outcomes, like the private equity firm that was letting AI do its investing strategy, and it lost several or many billions of dollars over a very short period of time before a human could get back control of it. Now, we're not really going to dive into a lot of how that's functioning in the back end, but rather the implications for marketing. And because we are psychology based, and because we have a PhD with us today, I want to really focus on how it's affecting human psychology. Now, one of the things, James, you focus on is how humans have changed historically, particularly in recent times, both everything from the size of their brains, but how we're processing information. And AI is going to have a continuing effect on that. So why don't we dive into that topic and let you give us an overview of how we're all changing?
Yeah, sounds good. The tricky thing is that a lot of things actually are still the same. So humans, we have the same basic motivations and goals that we've always had, and that's generally along the lines of surviving until tomorrow. But what does change is kind of our environment, our tools, what's around us. And so as those things change, then the way we approach those basic problems and motivations and goals that we always have, our approach to those changes, our psychology towards those things changes. Maybe the way we interact changes a little bit along with them as well. And that's what we're seeing here with AI. It's a brand new environment. More than anything else, humans can be defined by our adaptability to new environment, new tools, and that's simply all that AI is. Now, of course, we're still adapting to a lot of the new tools we've got in the last 150 years, but we're going to throw another one on in humans. If there's an animal that can handle it, it's us humans, and we're doing a great job.
Well, things certainly are changing. You tell this story about cab drivers in London. I'm going to ask you to tell again because it's really profound about how these changes affect us, not just how we process information, but physically.
Exactly. Yeah. When people think brain, they don't think going to the gym, working out, and getting bigger muscles and stuff. But this study actually, it's an fMRI study that shows that might very well be the case, or actually, it's not too far off. And so now, this was on London cab drivers. It's really, really difficult to be a London cab driver. It takes 3 to 4 years, extensive training. They drive around on mopeds. There's like 25,000 streets, lots of areas of interest, and they have to memorize all of it. It's actually only 50% actually succeed in the final exam. And so what
Wow.
these researchers did is they took fMRI or MRI scans of these participants or these trainees right at the start of their program and at the end of the program. And what they found was that the trainees who were successful, their hippocampi, the memory sort of center of the brain, it actually grew by about 30%. It substantially grew larger than everyone else who was in the study, either the people who failed the study or who didn't take part in it. And so indicating, yeah, our brain will literally grow or shrink in response to our environment, depending on what we're being exposed to on a daily basis.
That's a profound result. It kind of catches people off guard that our brain is literally growing and shrinking depending on how and when we use our brain. Thus, we can expect that the changes of spending more time in front of a computer, how consumers are evolving in terms of social media content and web content, and now AI, we expect to have further physical changes on the brain, but also perceptual changes on the brain, how we process information and how we react to that information, which, shocker, is going to have major implications for those of us in marketing.
Right. Yep, exactly. So one of the things that we're seeing a big change in here in just the last 10 years or so, maybe 20, but it's this dopamine cycle that we're getting from online and social media and online interactions. Now, it's pretty typical. If you win a game or if you win some sort of prize, you get this little shot of dopamine, a little bit of serotonin, but a lot of dopamine. It makes you feel good, it makes you feel excited. And now social media has really capitalized on that because when you get a bunch of likes on a post that you made, or if maybe you get a notification that someone followed you, you get that same shot of dopamine, that same little burst, that same little high, that all things are really great. And it pulls you in, it increases engagement. And AI is now getting really good at this. They're actually using variable ratios or variable intervals to kind of send out these notifications at various points in the day, when it's going to have the most impact, when it's going to increase your engagement and keep people coming back again and again and again.
And that dopamine response, one of my favorite tidbits, it also explains why it's so addictive because we're only getting the dopamine. We don't get the rest of the feel good chemicals. So it's a very unfulfilling thing when you check into social media and you see somebody's liked, and why you keep wanting to come back because you're missing the rest of those feel good chemicals like serotonin, like some of the other receptors that complete the process. Now, that has implications, obviously, for how we consume social media, but it's going to have implications beyond that, including our changes in attention. One of my favorite topics. Can't wait to hear you describe this.
Right. So there was an article that made huge waves a few years ago. It's called The Myth, or the humans have attention span is less than that of a goldfish, or something along those.
Right.
So, which is actually pretty unfair to both humans and goldfish. Goldfish can remember things fairly well, but that was the myth. The myth is that human attention span is actually dropping like a rock. And while it's more nuanced than that. So not only our attention span is actually still fairly good, but what has changed though is how much attention we pay to any one thing in front of us. So maybe 20 years ago, I think that we spent maybe 4 seconds looking at any ad. Now that's down to less than half a second. So what's changed with our attention is that we go flip, 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 flip. Ah, I found something I'm going to pay attention to. I'm actually going to direct my full attention to it. And it lasts longer than a goldfish attention. So Yeah, that's one of the big things coming out in the last 20 years.
Now, humans have always been really efficient at not paying attention, at deciding what we need to pay attention to and what we don't. And that is, of course, the number one problem in marketing. How do I get somebody to pay attention to my content? And what I'm hearing is that a lot of this is making us even more discerning, perhaps is the right word to be complimentary, about what we pay attention to. So, how does this affect what we remember and what we are storing?
Right. So this is another area similar to the cab driver study, and which I'll point out now is that it wasn't all good. They actually had them try to compete some visual memory tasks, and they actually were worse than when they started. So part of their hippocampus actually shrank that had to do with that specific type of memory. And that's what we're seeing with this, with the advent of the digital age. We're actually offloading a lot of our memory ability to digital devices. And so the researchers call this digital amnesia. The idea that if I can find some sort of device to remember things for me, well, my brain doesn't have to do that anymore. And I forget. And so instead of this has now become my hippocampi. This could store everything. So we're literally, in a way, we're becoming cyborgs. We're becoming attached to our digital devices, which allow us to complete more things. And so what's changing with our memory and our knowledge base is that instead of remembering things, we are remembering where we can find information about things. We don't remember the information itself. We're just like, where can I go to find the highest quality information that's going to give me what I need? And then I'm going to go there and it'll remember it for me.
You know, and it's important to note we've always done that a little bit. We sometimes offload memory to other people. For instance, my wife doesn't remember where we keep the tools in the house or the light bulbs because that's part of my responsibility. Whereas I don't remember a number of the things that she's taken responsibility for in the house. And our brain is just looking for efficient ways to spend its resources. So part of that's normal. And you're saying it's accelerating because of access to the internet, because of social media, now because of AI.
Exactly. The brain, it's what we call it a cognitive miser in psychology. If it can find, it looks for the shortest path to its goal that it can actually find. It wants to spend the least amount of energy. And if you give it a leg up somewhere, it's going to use it. And
Right.
then that means it offloads it if it can.
So this brings us back to the number one question in marketing, Dr. James, which is how do we get someone to pay attention in the first place? Because we're finding out that we're bombarded more than we ever have been. We pay less attention. We're more discerning. And there's a concept called cognitive disruption that if you've been exposed to Intermark very much, you've paid some attention to. What is cognitive disruption?
Yeah, to understand cognitive disruption, you actually have to take a step back and understand what schemas are. So schemas are like patterns of behavior, patterns of language, simply things that we recognize in the world. And we've gotten used to them. We count on them. They're stable for us. So for example, if I might say, uh, later that evening, I'm going to take the dog for and then I can stop there. Actually, you probably stopped listening halfway through because you probably already figured out what I was going to say, how I was going to end that. And so our brain, we're always looking forward. Again, we may not think this or realize this now, but our brain was designed to survive until tomorrow, which means we have to anticipate, is that a threat? Is that not a threat? Is that food? Is that not food? We're always, our brain's trying to stay one step ahead. And so when you say something like this, the brain's already filling in that last word. And so once it does that, like, okay, I'll pay attention to something else, or I'll try to think ahead what he's going to say next. I don't really have to pay attention here. I can just let it go. But what happens when that blank is filled in by something unexpected?
Like, I'm going to take the dog for a beer. All of a sudden, it's like a record scratch moment for the brain of like, oh, wait a minute. That was not what I was expecting. I need to stop and pay attention to this, give cognitive resources up. And so it's one of the number one lessons within marketing. And you've heard us talk about it before in previous webinars. We have to be unexpected. We have to break cliches because the brain is looking to see if it knows what is coming. And if it does, it just doesn't pay attention at all. It saves those resources for something else. And this applies whether we are scrolling our social media feeds or we're driving down the road looking at billboards or sitting there in front of the television trying to decide what to pay attention to. Now, this has major implications of marketing. The first one, of course, being be unexpected, break the cliches, use cognitive disruption to get people to pay attention to. But it boils down to what you mentioned a minute ago, that our brains are designed to be prediction machines. And in fact, there's a lot of academic literature that supports this notion.
Yes, exactly. It's fascinating how much the brain is similar to a computer, but just vastly more complicated. But yes, that it's trying to predict 3 steps ahead, 4 steps ahead. And so again, and it's also designed for survival. looking for things like danger. And so the moment that you introduce some sort of novelty or something that's out of the ordinary, something that it didn't expect, it immediately says, no, no, you have to pay attention to this. This could mean your life. Unfortunately, today we don't have to worry about saber-tooth tigers and whatnot. And so that generally means this could be something interesting. This could be something fun, which the human brain is also fond of those things.
So we start with that notion, and let's circle back to conversation around AI, because I'm sure everybody's super eager. What does this mean for AI? Well, one of the observations we have for AI is it's great about aggregating and distilling information. If you ask it a question, it will give you an answer based off of what it knows from the internet. But if you ask it to innovate, it's pretty terrible at innovation because it is using all existing knowledge as a basis for that. Now, this isn't a new observation. In fact, some clever folks have already done a TV spot illustrating AI's difficulty with innovation. And let's start with the TV spot because I love good creative.
Lunchables Dunkables presents AI versus KI, Kid Imagination. We asked kids to imagine what they saw as they ate Dunkables.
Imagine your pretzel twist as something fantastical. What is it?
This is a pretzel snake. It's a pretzel rocket.
Then we gave AI the exact same prompt.
It's a matzo bunny. It's a mozzarella sun. It's a pretzel dragon.
Kids imagined all this, but AI couldn't imagine anything but food.
You know, and that's a major reminder to us of how AI functions. It's not really thinking, even though it kind of gives us this illusion that it is, but rather it is using existing knowledge to comb through and aggregate, to boil things down to come up with likely answers to questions based off of all of the internet or some subset that we give us. And this has major implications for us as marketers. The number one being that if you keep asking the same question of it, you're going to get awful similar answers because it's using the same base of information for that. So what does this mean for those of us in marketing? We got to be really careful about the fact that it's driving the same answers. A lot of folks are already using this for blog posts, for SEM, writing emails, etc. And what we're finding is getting those same answers. If you ask 10 people to ask AI the same question, their answers are all going to be awful similar because of how AI generally functions. An example of this in SEO is Google is taking note of how much content has been produced by AI and how similar it is, and they're punishing websites that have done this to the extent they begin completely delisting sites, not just dinging their SEO ranking, but taking them out of search engine ranking entirely because so much of their content had clearly been written by AI, and they knew this because it was the same content everywhere else. So at a very prima facie level, we've got to be careful about that redundancy that's occurring with AI and the lack of innovation that's occurring. And we're also going to see this in other places. It's going to lead inevitably to the law of diminishing return. So if you ask it to write great subject lines for you, it may work well the first time if nobody else has used the same prompt, but it will quickly begin seeing that, hey, this is what worked, and it'll begin using the same prompt for other folks outside of your organization. We've all seen this with email. They've probably gotten an email subject line sometime several months ago with a headline you hadn't seen, like, hey, Jake, I got a quick question about your sales for the year. It's like, oh, okay, well, that sounds familiar. Maybe I'll click on that. Well, AI noted that I clicked on that. Well, then all of a sudden, 2 months later, 40 of my emails in my inbox are all using a similar headline. And I'm realizing all of that's not real. It's all AI generated, and thus I begin ignoring it. The law of diminishing returns has happened, and it's already accelerating. And this is a danger because we're all using similar tools to ask similar questions of how we get outcomes. In fact, the handful of tools that marketers are landing around, while there are several hundred AI tools, there are only a handful that are generating the bulk of content. And even the diverse tools are often using the same basis of content to teach their AI how to come up with answers, which means that as we all begin using this, we're all going to get similar answers. Our emails are going to sound alike, our headlines are going to sound alike, our blog posts are going to look alike, and we've got to be wary of that. And then what hasn't happened yet, AI will become self-referential. As we're all putting out blog posts driven by AI, AI will begin using those blog posts that it wrote as a way to train itself. And the content it produces will become self-referential, and the normalization will occur at an even faster rate. Now, this has major implications for those of us in marketing because it means, remember, our job is cognitive disruption. We have to be unexpected. We have to avoid cliches. And AI is going to be, in some ways, a giant cliche machine at some point. Now, this doesn't mean that it doesn't have its uses. It's just that we have to be aware of when and how to use it. So, a few handy tools that you can apply within the marketing space. Number one, don't rely entirely on AI. Use it as kind of a first draft engine. And number two, be wary of creating entire articles or long form content out of AI. You got to go in and edit them. You got to go in and make this relevant to your audience, which means you got to take your target audience into account. You got to take in your legal and ethical considerations into account. Do I need to be transparent about this as AI? It's got to be filtered via your brand, and you've got to be very careful to make sure that it's context sensitive, where it's going to be used, and culturally sensitive. You probably all saw the news recently when one of the AI engines started producing weird outcomes. So you would say, hey, show me a picture of Nazi soldiers from World War II. And it was producing images of African Americans wearing Nazi paraphernalia. It's AI. It can't think. It is trying to produce things that it thinks we want to see based off existing prompts. It is your job as a human to filter those prompts and make sure that they are tonally relevant. This isn't happening a whole lot. You can see as you browse online, people aren't going in and editing their own content. And this is something that's particularly dangerous because these errors will lead to inconsistent, generic, and even highly risky content. We all saw that one example. This has now been less than 9 months ago when a lawyer turned in a legal brief that was entirely written by AI. And it turned out about half the cases in that legal brief, AI just completely fabricated. Had he edited or checked his own work, he would have realized, hey, this is a problem. We've got to be aware of that. And not just because it's going to lead to general cliches, but because we still have a job as humans to make sure that it is most relevant to our target audiences. And this has major implications for SEO and SEM. It is because of the sea of sameness that it's going to produce. You've got to go in and edit by hand. The human still has to have a role here. I've already heard of some agencies and some clients go, no, we're just going to let AI do the whole thing. And you get an initial boost because you're one of the first ones doing it. And those scores are going to slide and have difficulty recovering because our competitors are using the same strategies, be putting out the same content, and Google is punishing us for it. We've got to have a human involved and have some innovation. We've got to have regular content. This also means that humans have to take the lead overall on the concept of innovation, of doing things differently, of finding things to say that haven't been said before. AI is really great at aggregating and summarizing and saying, hey, these are the top 10 things you need to be aware of. We've got to have humans to add value to that in ways that can't be replicated somewhere else. Because remember, as AI gets integrated into search, there's less need for people to go to websites. Because if you ask a question, hey, what car has the most horsepower? Well, it used to be Google would say, oh, here are a few sites that you may want to go check that out. There's something on Chevrolet, they might send you to the Corvette page, or something on Toyota, they might send you to the Toyota Tundra page. And they were sending people to websites to get those answers. Now, if you ask it that question, the first thing it does is it answers the question. We've already seen projections saying that we expect about a third less overall internet traffic within a couple of years because people are going to be find their questions answered rather than going to a website to find it. And that has implications for how we create content. And what it means is that we have to become a source of trusted content. Now, this is blog posts, video posts, etc., but it means they can't all be AI written. We have to be adding general and unique value around a topic so people have a reason to come to our site other than answering simple questions, because answering those simple questions used to be an easy SEO strategy. It's no longer going to be an SEO strategy because search is going to fill that void on our behalf. So we already know that generating trust is a great way of creating affinity. Having content that drives that trust around very specific topic areas is a way to become sticky, to have people seek out your content and spend time with your content on a site. And that's a role that humans will be inextricably tied to, of creating that content. You cannot outsource it to AI, and we're not anywhere close. We may get to a point where AI is genuinely thinking, and we can worry about the Terminator then, but we got a long way to go before it's genuinely innovative. Second big area of AI, and one of its shortfalls that we have to take into consideration, is this concept of human judgment. Now, AI can't make good decisions. Rather, it is taking aggregated information and reporting based off of those. And sometimes it produces things that just do not make a lot of sense. Thus, you've got to go in and edit the content that it's putting out and apply to human judgment. If you outsource decision making to it, we'll find that poor decisions are regularly happening. I mentioned earlier one of the private equity firms doing an investment strategy. They created an AI bot to do investments based off historical data, and it proceeded to blow almost $45 billion of investment losses over a few hour period before the humans could get to it and effectively unplug it, because it lacked the human judgment to realize, hey, near-term losses could be too painful, even if you might be right over a 1 or 2 or 3 year period. And it's because of that lack of human judgment involved in it that we have to be careful of it as marketers. Great example of this, really, when it comes to emotional content, that the human judgment when it comes to understanding how humans process emotion is particularly lacking within AI. Now, here's a spot I want to show, and then we can talk about it afterwards.
And that was the Vienna Wood Dance in D, one of my all-time favorites. And now let's make that random call with today's $10,000 question. It's a tough one. Who shot Alexander Hamilton?
Sorry, I'm messing that up. So the spot you've likely seen before, it's the Got Milk commercial. Alexander Hamilton, he makes a peanut butter sandwich, eats it, and because he's got so much peanut butter in his mouth, he can't swallow. He needs some milk. Now, if you ask AI to produce a commercial for milk, it will tell you all about the benefits of milk and how it's got extra calcium, it's got great calories, it's part of a healthy diet, and lots of rational drivers. What it cannot do is innovate around the emotion of that. It can provide you feedback on emotional concepts, but it can't provide you the original concept. It took humans to understand how people are interacting with this and describe it in a unique way. This is a great example of a spot that could not have been created by the AI, at least as how it exists today. Now, we see this in other areas of understanding how humans have experienced events. A beautiful spot from Apple that is very illustrative of how it requires humans to really understand and convey the human experience.
Pandemic has the possibility of bringing us together in ways none of us would have been able to expect.
3, 2, 7, 8.
I'm so small, said the mole. Yes, said the boy, but you make a huge difference.
It's a beautiful spot by Apple, and it really gets at understanding human experience as something AI, at least today, can't effectively capture. You know, I look at that and I think to myself, wow, I've got 4 kids. I relate to the kids' experience during the pandemic, during that period. I lived through the pandemic, as all of you did, and relate to some of what we saw within that and how creativity and human connection played a role in that. And it's because humans are not, or AI are not humans, are not getting the content that we all are experiencing just from walking around and living day to day. It is existing all off of written text online, which does not convey the overall human experience. And it also lacks the judgment to filter through jokes of things where somebody puts out being absurd and silly. And as a result, we get things that sometimes don't make sense, where if you look at the source content, you're like, oh, that was absurdity, or that was silly, or that was somebody being funny. You can filter through it as a human super easily because you understand the human experience. AI has yet to develop that ability. And that's part of what the lesson here is that we require humans to convey emotional messages. Now, I don't have to tell any of you that great marketing is driven by emotional insights. That's how we drive human changes in behavior. And I'm oversimplifying a lot of psychology here, James, so please forgive me, but it's a great summary, right? That we make decisions emotionally and then we rationalize them after the fact. And because of that, it requires humans not only to innovate, but to help us understand the human role in all of this. Now, with that said, AI can be spectacular about leading us to that place. What you're seeing here is a screenshot from Sephora. Now, Sephora realized that their consumers were overwhelmed with the sheer number of products that they had. So they developed a chat bot that would recommend to people other products that might be relevant to them. What they found is AI is spectacular at this. It could use existing data sets to say, hey, other people like you have shopped for things like this, and therefore we know what to recommend to you based off historical data. Again, this is where AI excels. Historical data, using it to aggregate and distill to make recommendations that are relevant to all of us. Spectacular place. Where it will struggle is in true innovation. A great example of this is with Toyota. Now, this is a website that was developed at our sister company, Alloy, when they began working with Toyota. And one of the things they realized from examining humans is that humans really wanted to go in and customize their vehicles. So they developed the concept for the world's first automotive configurator. And you guys know what a configurator is, a build your own feature where you can kind of go in and add features and change the color and pick out selections and packages and options and then find it in inventory. Now, remember, AI doesn't function like this. It looks at what people have already done and then will give you recommendations based off of that. If something has never existed before, it lacks the ability to tell you that that's what they're looking for. That requires humans to truly innovate. This particularly applies to new experiences. AI can give you some suggestions of places there might be gaps, but they can't truly innovate. So that role of new product innovation, of new developmental technologies, of finding new ways to solve problems, it can tell you what has been successful and will catch you up with your competition, but it cannot push you ahead of things. Great example I like to look back on when the iPhone first came out. Everyone thought, okay, you're getting into that space. Well, we already have Palm Pilots. What do I need this for? And they thought, well, hey, what if we unify this? And the insight was humans needed to be mind-numbingly simple. Now, this is not a lesson that AI would have told you because it was not based off an existing set of experience. Rather, it would have told you, let's mimic Palm Pilot because that was the dominant operating system at the time. Yet Apple went off and developed something unique. The rest is history. It's that level of innovation when it boils down to human interaction, user experience, UX, that still requires a human to tell you what they don't know to ask for. And that's a great example of where AI can fit in and help us excel. The lesson here is we got to find balance. I know we talked a lot about negative aspects of AI, and I don't mean to be negative Nelly at all. We use AI extensively throughout the agency. We're using it to optimize some media in places. We're using it to help produce dashboards, to answer questions simply as a first draft engine, and lots of other great places. But it means that we got to find a balance with it. We got to recognize what it's not good at. And we know today that it's not good at true innovation, because it is using existing data sets to give us answers. Thus, it's going to produce the same answers over and over and over again. And as you and your competitors are using it, you're going to get lots of similar content, lots of similar answers, and it still requires a human to go in and edit that. The second area, AI is not great at deciphering human emotions, understanding the human experience. It may get there, sure, but it's a long way from that today. It is merely trying to aggregate what we've all written online and blogs and social media posts and then spit that out to us in different ways, but it doesn't really understand how we're all thinking and feeling. So if you want to connect with humans emotionally, that still requires humans to be really good. And then three, it can't help you drive the human experience forward. And this really applies in that online space and how your website functions, your mobile app functions, and overall experience functions. It can tell you what has been successful in the past, but it can't tell you what ought to be in the future. And so it still requires a human to understand what we are seeking, even when we have yet to verbalize that. Now, AI is unbelievably powerful, and we're all going to be integrating it into what we are doing. In fact, if you haven't, you're probably a little bit behind the curve. But we're seeing, as the curve is catching up with everybody, some unexpected outcomes, that law of diminishing returns kicking in, and we've got to evolve along with it. Because it's happening rapidly, we've all got to evolve very, very quickly. Now, we're seeing some very successful places where AI is being used. And I want to highlight a few of those. For instance, the folks over at Nutella used AI to produce custom packaging on Nutella, and they put out hundreds of thousands of units, all with their own unique packaging, and highlighted like, hey, you can buy some Nutella and you will have the only person in the universe with this specific packaging. Wonderfully successful. It was a place that AI excelled at. Mass uniqueness, if you will. The folks at Coca-Cola did their own version of AI. So it produced visual images that were on brands. They spent some time customizing this. And they allowed their users to produce custom images, but it required the humans to develop unique prompts to develop those custom images. And there's a great way to highly engage their audiences and produce unique content that was still on brand, that was still reflective of what Coca-Cola wanted to put out in the space. So AI can be wonderful in terms of engaging our customers, but it is not a panacea for turning over all creative to. In fact, we're seeing really poor results from agencies that are trying to do that. In fact, it's leaning into the big book of cliches, which we know from the laws of cognitive disruption aren't going to work and will have increasing diminishing returns as we move forward. Lastly, we would not be doing our jobs if we didn't have some commentary about using our judgment around this and the notion of transparency, because Dr. James, people have odd reactions between whether they know they're interacting with AI versus when they think they're talking to a human.
Right, exactly. Again, it's like a lot of psychologies, there's a lot of nuance in it. But a recent Pew survey found that actually people, they like the idea of AI being involved in certain aspects of their life, but they really don't like it being involved in other aspects of their life. So mental health counseling, diagnosing even, they don't really like the idea of their personal doctor diagnosing their cold as something with using AI. But they love the idea of AI being involved in detecting cancer, maybe performing surgeries, things along those lines. So and this will shift over time and ebb and flow, but consumer sentiment towards AI is something that you have to pay attention to. And so it's then important to announce that this AI was involved in this, but not this, and that makes a big difference. But one of the places that AI is awesome is actually in these personalization, these chat bots that are popping up. However, the little chat boxes that pop up say, hey, I'm here to help you. Those aren't very appealing, but using a little bit of psychology, we humans love other humans. We're naturally drawn to them. The more human you can make something, the more we like it, the more we trust it, the more we want to interact with it. And so this is that nice synergy here where we're seeing AI combined with this human psychology, make it look like human. Even though we know it's AI, it actually increases people's engagement and their trust of what is otherwise a computer program. Of course, the danger is you don't want to go drift so far into make it hyper realistic that you fall into the uncanny valley. So.
Yeah, and before we get into Uncanny Valley, I've got to remind everybody of this story again, fairly recent, where one large company, I won't mention who it is, was using an AI chatbot for their customer interaction, and the AI actually produced its own refund policy. And a court recently ruled that even though AI made it up and wasn't actually their refund policy, the company had to honor it. And this leads us back into that lesson about we can't turn over everything to AI. There's still a role for humans within this because it's still buggy. It still has yet to get there. But as James, you mentioned, the uncanny valley, which is this notion that things that are almost human but aren't quite kind of freak us out a little bit. I love referencing the Polar Express is a movie with Tom Hanks in it from a number of years ago. If you have kids, you have likely seen this movie. If you're my generation, I know you've seen this movie. Great movie. But what was memorable about the movie wasn't the plot or that Tom Hanks was in it, but rather how creepy all the characters looked in it, because they were trying to make awful close to looking humans, but they had what we call dead eyes, which really illustrates the uncanny valley, things that look like they're human, but something's not quite right, and how weird that makes us feel. Talk a little bit more about that.
Right. So yeah, research dove into this, trying to figure it out. And so even though the uncanny valley, it's been around, or the term at least has been around since the 70s, we've never really had to worry about it till fairly recently. But what research shows is that when we see something that looks really, really a lot like a human, but then there's just little things that are off. Maybe it's the dead eyes, maybe it's the face doesn't move just right, or maybe something. And then what we think is that, well, if that is a human, that might be a dead human, or that might be a diseased human. And either way, the primal parts of our brain kick in and say, you know what? Either I don't want anything to do with someone who's dead or diseased because it could affect me. And so we kind of shy away. It makes us feel uncomfortable, kind of icky inside. And so if you do go for hyper realistic, what they suggest is make the person as beautiful and as perfect as possible, flawless if you can, and also if you can, try not to go too hyper realistic. So,
and it's often just a simple rule that you probably need to let people know what is being produced by AI and what is not. We've seen some areas where brands have failed spectacularly when they tried to do this. You probably remember a political ad not so recently where somebody used a made-up image of somebody engaging with a constituency, and it turns out the photo of the constituent had 3 hands. Public was quick to point it out. AI, of course, did not notice that it had produced a human with 3 hands because it is not a human, and it didn't seem weird. The backlash from it was overwhelming. I don't have the research, but I feel quite confident it did a lot more damage to their brand than whatever they hope to gain with using this. So being transparent about when and how you're using it is always smart, and because you don't want to get into this area where you get a backlash because people thought it was a human and it wasn't. And once they figure it out, the mental backlash from that can be tremendous. So the conclusion for all of this is we've got to do it all. We're going to be using AI because it is an effective tool, but it is just that, a tool, and we have to be conscious of what it is. It is an aggregation engine and will boil up existing content to give us summaries of that content, whether it be imagery, copy, headlines, whatever it asks it to produce. It does not think on its own. It gives the illusion of thinking, and this is where we as humans fall into a trap, and we have to go into this understanding that 3 things. 1, it cannot innovate on its own. It's not going to come up with content that has never existed before. Perhaps one day it will, but we're not there yet. Number 2, it does a really poor job of connecting with humans emotionally. This still requires humans because only humans can really understand the human experience. AI can give us some ideas in this space. It can give you a directional piece, but it can't really close that gap and tell you what's going to connect with humans. And it actually does a really poor job even of telling you of things you produced if it will connect well with humans. That still requires interacting with humans. And then lastly, it's going to do a poor job as we try to innovate within the human experience online and in mobile apps and even in games, coming up with something that has not existed before. Now, humans can be bad at this as well. We have a tendency to mimic what has happened before. We do want to know what has been successful for, so we can reproduce that. But if you want to innovate, if you want to come up with something that has happened before digitally, AI is not going to help you in that space because of how it is learning, it lacks the ability to come up with things that have not been. We saw that in that ad about with the kids and what can pretzels be. Well, AI continues to tell you pretzels can look like weird pretzels, but they're always going to be pretzels. Whereas humans will be like, what if we built a pretzel rocket ship? And we're getting this from children, and we're not children. You are professionals. You've got wonderfully creative people around you. Lean into what they do well, but at the same time, let's allow AI to do what it does well. So always going to have a balance here. And that's a great effective summary. So I hope that out of this, you've generated some questions. James and I will stick around for the next few minutes and answer any questions that you may have. In the meantime, if you have enjoyed this content and our psychological perspective, feel free to go follow us on any of our social medias. We put out a lot of human-generated content around human behavior, how people think, how we understand that behavior, and the implications it has for marketing. AI is going to be one of those many tools, but we need an understanding of what we are doing with it, lest we chase it down a path and find ourselves the subject of one of those headlines where we've done something foolish, or when things no longer work and we're unable to explain why because we lack an understanding of where to use AI and where not to use AI. So we'll see about asking any questions. If you have some that you would like to put in the Q&A or in the chat, we're happy to take them. One of the questions that we get most frequently, James, is where do we start, particularly in understanding people? So talk a little bit about what process you go through in helping to understand people and the flavor you're adding to that as a human psychologist.
Nice. Yeah. Well, oh boy, where to start? It's a great question. So I like to tell people that it depends is the answer. If you ask a good psychologist any question and the first 2 words out of their mouth isn't "it depends," they're not a very good psychologist. But however, I can generally answer this, is that you need to understand the basic motivations behind people. Generally, that has to do with their meaning making in life. Oftentimes it comes down to what's most important, what do they prioritize, and then that can vary demographic to demographic, age to age, actually, so different age groups as well. And it does get super complicated super quick, but that's how you can kind of dissect it. You can start categorizing people into those groups and then move on from there. Generally speaking, what you look for, people are most engaged and have the most motivation if they can derive some sort of positive emotion, and they derive positive emotion by progressing towards their most positive goal. So that's what you want to find. What is their most positive goal? lay out the track, lay out the pathway for them, that'll be motivation for them.
Yeah, and there's a role for AI here as well. Like we're using AI to aggregate social media content, to boil down, to find out sentiment analysis and things it can be particularly good at. So it can kind of give us some directional data. But at the end of the day, we require people like you to talk to actual humans and find out nuance of what is not being said or the subtext of what's being said. Because one of the things that you've talked about a lot is humans do a really terrible job of even understanding, let alone conveying what's going through their own head. We're kind of blind to our own thinking. We think we're thinking through everything. We think we understand our own thinking, and we really don't. Like, when we're using that MRI machine or the EEG to see how people are making decisions, we see that they're making decisions and then they rationalize them after the fact. And understanding that dichotomy requires a human, because marketers have known this for a while. If you ask somebody, hey, why did you buy that shirt? They'll tell you an answer, even if that answer has nothing to do with what the real answer was. And understanding the differences between those is critical.
Exactly. Lots of times the decision is made halfway through, and a reason for that decision is given at the very end.
That's right. So we had one question about ethical guidelines or principles informing our approach to decision-making processes. This is one that gets into a more challenging area. So one of the things that we're big advocates of is being transparent about when and how we're using AI. This doesn't mean that you say, hey, AI wrote this headline for me, because that may not matter. But if an entire article is written by AI, that's something you probably need to give consideration to. We rarely recommend that you allow AI to produce the entire long form content without customizing it, et cetera. If you're allowing AI to interact with humans, you really need to be transparent about what that is, whether it's a chat bot, an automated voice service, et cetera, or anything that they might think was a human. We saw this recently again in politics, where they use AI to artificially reproduce a voice of one of the candidates to put it out. And the backlash from it was unbelievably strong from both sides of the political spectrum, because people have this fear of being tricked, of that uncanny valley of being led into thinking that something is AI when perhaps it really was not. Tremendous questions. Another question that we got was, do we expect specific marketing function skills will become obsolete? Yeah, absolutely. Now, when and how they'll become obsolete is a good question. So one of the things that we're already seeing diminished value within is kind of the low-level copy, writing copy for things that are mundane or regular, product descriptions, et cetera. We no longer need to pay somebody to sit and develop the first several paragraphs. However, humans better be the ones going in and editing it, adding brand content to it, adding a point of view from their target audiences, and making sure that it's not entirely AI driven. So editors of content have become increasingly important, whereas the first draft of that content, AI does a fine job of producing. The mistake we see marketers made is when they think that it is sufficient, that putting out that first draft of the content is okay. The other area that we think AI may eventually get to is in image development. So right now, within our agency, we use AI for non-published images. So if we are pitching an idea to a client, we say, hey, if we had a cat riding a horse with a taco in his hand, and we want to show a visual of that, AI can produce that image lickety-split. However, that image is based off existing content. Now, it probably has legal issues that we fully expect one day to show up in the court. So you don't want to use those images in production work. You still want to have a human produce those images either through custom Photoshop work and or an original photo shoot. And that's a good area, that's some legal gray areas that we're advising our clients to be very careful of, because feel pretty good that we're going to have a lawsuit coming within that space. Got a good question about AI and asking, is it powerful enough to visually nudge or influence people? And the answer to this is yes, of course. And we're seeing this with a Sephora example earlier. Particularly in the digital space, AI is really good at understanding human behavior. It can look through all of your data and say, hey, we noticed that most people that buy this, or they start at this page and go to this page. We used to require humans to go through and do that analysis by hand, whereas AI can do it on the fly and live. So it can be great about improving overall human experience, about nudging us and saying, hey, most people that start on the Camry page are looking for special offers immediately thereafter. Why don't we take special offers and make that available high on the page? And so that's an area where AI can use insights that are generated from lots of data to nudge people along. And we're big fans of that, because here at Intermark, our core purpose is helping you understand consumers better and for us to communicate with consumers in a way that's more effective for both parties. because marketing sometimes falls down in that space. And it's a great example of where AI can lean into that. But AI is limited by historical data. It doesn't really understand what humans are looking for. It's merely looking at data. And so perhaps it can't tell you that what they're really looking for is the payment on that Camry. Now, that step gets omitted because the page they go to are the incentives. A human might look at this and say, you know what, we really need to integrate payment information off of every page. And that's what the humans are really looking for. AI might eventually get there, but you're going to stumble along the way if you're solely relying off AI and not allowing it to produce genuine insights, because that's not what AI does. It is not innovating. It is not understanding how people are going through the human experience, nor going to produce things that have never existed before. Last question, and then we will wrap it up. What processes are in place to address issues or discrepancies identified through monitoring and evaluation? Big question here, and I'm not certain I fully understand the scope of what you're asking, but my initial thought here is that it still requires humans to be involved before you allow AI to do much of anything. Now, this isn't to say there aren't some things that we can allow AI some control over. For instance, if you are allowing Google to manage your ad budgets with AdWords, it's using AI. It's looking at performance data and then optimizing it against that. Let's put things that are generating leads or driving a cost per click or whatever rules you give it in making those decisions. Most things require a human judgment, and that would be an example of that. I would still have a human going in and looking at those decisions and saying, are we getting the sort of outcomes that we want, and what are we sacrificing? Because sometimes AI doesn't ask those sort of questions. It just follows the rules that we give it and lacks that broader base of human judgment. So humans still have a necessary role here, both in understanding us as humans, innovation, but also making those judgment calls that sometimes are ethical calls and sometimes are pieces of the business that we simply forgot to program within AI that still are valuable. That, hey, we're no longer marketing to this target segment, perhaps because they didn't convert as much, but long-term, that's still a value that we want to have. And that's human judgment that still needs to have a place in this function. Well, guys, we are up against our time window. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Dr. James, wonderful as always. If you have questions, jump on our social media, send me a question. We're already thinking ahead of what some of our next content is going to be. Your questions drive a lot of the answers that we, or the topics that we choose to address. If you got something that's burning or you want to have additional comments, please let us know. In the meantime, we will talk to everyone again next time. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you then. Thank you so much.
See ya.